How's it going, guys? Please let me know about the audio in the chat because I'm having a lot of weird buggy issues right now. But basically, this stream uh, is going to deal with signal gating and perception versus reality. And if you've ever looked out at humanity and thought that they all seem insane and that nothing makes any sense and, you know, et cetera, I'm going to explain to you exactly why that is and how to get rid of it. And the thing is, this how to get rid of it part, the caveat is that this applies to the individual, you know. Dealing with this on a collective scale is something that we're going to have to trust to evolution, right? But basically, what it comes down to is that our nervous system actually has software that allows us to filter out perceptions that are not consistent with our current worldview, right? So I talk about the Fibonacci and mirror symmetry, right, at the Calabi-Yau scale a lot, and this thing of replication by reflection that operates at all scales. This is another example, you know. It is really the key to everything. And there are a lot of analogies that you can use to kind of understand what's happening when people talk about the Great Awakening process, right? It's like when you have a child and you filter its perception in order to protect it from the world at large, right? The universe and its full bandwidth of perceptibles are like that for us as a species. And what has happened is that our environment has outpaced the speed of our cognitive adaptations, right? So this filtration system in our nervous system was designed for, I mean, if you think about the evolutionary paradigm, right? This is like 4% that we've spent in civilization. And the telescopic nature of the modern paradigm has been such that we went from 100,000 years from hunter and gatherer to agriculture, and then from there to industrialization in 1,000 years, and then from there to modern civilization in 100, and then from there to whatever the fuck is happening now in, you know, tiny and tiny, tinier and tiny, tinier and tinier and tinier increments of time, where there is this exponential acceleration. Like as you know, as it shrinks, it goes faster and faster and faster. So our brains still have these adaptations that are not context aware, right? Some of us are becoming what they're calling neurodivergent. And what that actually means is that our filtration system doesn't work as well as everyone else's. And, you know, it sounds really arrogant, but it really is an evolutionary adaptation. That's kind of what I've realized in the last 24 hours or whatever, this is also, by the way, while we're on the subject, why muggles and, you know, neurotypical people respond so poorly to autistic and neurodivergent people, because our filtration system is not there, and that is a major threat. So it really puts their hairs on end. So, I mean, really, I could end this stream right now because that's all I really have to say about this, you know, in order to get my point across, really. And I should mention on Substack, you'll find a really technical paper. I'm not going to get into all the neuroscience and, you know, the actual technicals of how all this works. I mean, we can talk about the default mode network, which basically gives us our sense of self. It has a lot to do with this sort of preening of our perceptual parameters, you know, and what we're finding out with psychedelics and other transcendental types of, you know, states is that basically from watching the default mode network, they're kind of being forced to admit that what's really happening is filters are being taken down. When people say that they lose their sense of self and they have a feeling of unity with a greater consciousness, it's not a feeling. It is a literal exposure to a more holistic perception of what reality actually is. Man, did we really lose everybody right away? That's crazy. Hard to believe, because this is, I mean, in my world, I guess it couldn't get any more important than understanding this, you know, because it's really been confusing. my entire life to kind of look around, and you see what are ostensibly highly intelligent people that are unable to process like super obvious constituents that, of their reality, particularly in certain areas like religion and politics and, cultural stuff. And to find out that the neuroscience now tells us that we are editing our reality and that there is a subconscious process, right? A lot of these signals never even make it to the parts of the brain where it's not like they get in there and then they're processed and rejected. They never even make it that far. So our perceptions are based on our expectations and like our historical data, right? So this is why programming a child extremely young is so important. Once you have certain parameters established, the brain is just going to do the same process that Fibonacci, DNA, mirror symmetry, that the entire universe uses to, replicate, and the recursive self-referential process that fucking the entire universe uses to create everything. You know, that's what's creating our perception. So when you can inculcate a model that serves certain purposes, to the managing parties, very young, the chances that this organism will ever escape it is very low. you know. And like I was saying before, I think I kind of went off on a tangent, but it was an evolutionary adaptation that served our purposes when we needed to be very task oriented and our focus very narrow, because all we were doing is hunting, fucking, building fires and shit. Um, so what's happening now is that we are in a much more sophisticated environment, and those filters are maladaptive at this point. They are at cross purposes with us because they put us in a position where any slightly more advanced organism that up the food chain that knows how all this shit works can exploit and manipulate everything below it based on an understanding of its cognitive apparatus, and you know and that's what we're experiencing. And another interesting aspect of this, though, is that using that child analogy again, um, as the child matures, you start to take the filters away because they no longer serve its purposes. And it's supposed to take responsibility for its own development after a certain point, right? Which explains the necessity for catalysts like entheogens and this sort of we're given the reins to our own meta-programming and even our cognitive evolutionary process, right? It's a beautiful and serendipitous, and that's part of the message of the process, right? It's demonstrating its sentience, that the process itself is sentient, in the way that it's sort of elaborating upon itself. I almost wanted to wait to do the stream until I had really processed this more, but it just felt so important, that as many people understand this as possible. And what I was getting at, I guess, is that the boomers and the older generations that have these filters like still heavily in place, they're actually serving a purpose as well. They're sort of like a restrainment parameter. It's like if you notice the kid has started drinking and he's kind of old enough, and you're like, that's maybe too much or something. Like their doubt and gaslighting and like, oh, like I don't know about this, esoteric, all that kind of stuff. It is true that if we do not aggregate enough wisdom to navigate like a highly intuitive, complex kind of, consciousness, there's a reason why nature limited the parameters of it. They kind of did serve a parental purpose evolutionarily, and also this maladaptation to circumstance is what's driving the adaptation now to bring the filters down and sort of expose the child to the actual underlying reality, So, yeah, I've already hit a wall. I mean, I think I I realized I was a little bit scattered. I've had a long day, but hopefully I got my point across well enough. It says I have no concurrent viewers. Is that real? No one's watching. I have trouble believing that. I hope not too, because that was yeah. It says zero concurrent viewers. Somebody let me know in the chat if I really am talking to myself because I'm not really into that. Yeah, it says it dropped off to zero. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to find out that YouTube doesn't like this. Okay, so there are people in the chat. Yeah, it says there are zero people. Yeah, I took ChatGPT's advice on this one and went with its recommendations for tags and thumbnail and stuff. I don't know if I should have did that. Yeah, so where was I? I mean, it's an interesting set of circumstances. I guess part of the point of the stream is just I want to direct attention to the Substack article because I'm not going to be able to regurgitate all of that, and it explains it all beautifully. Exactly what the circumstances are, and where we're where we're going with this and why. You know, whether or not the it's not epigenetic. This is another interesting thing that's kind of unfolding right now with along the lines of all this. There have been evolutionary adaptations that have been observed in the field with numerous species where the adaptations appear to be context aware, and not only context aware but aware of like temporal parameters, right? Like this has to happen right away or we're going to go extinct. So it happens instead of over the course of millions of years, it's happening in a season, you know? But this whole cognitive filtration system thing really explains a lot because it also kind of tells us where extremism comes from. It explains why the increasing like narrow focus of people like the right and the left seem to be just like their parameters of their perceptibles are more and more and more narrow, and it's because this mechanism just keeps reinforcing only those perceptions which meet our expectations and editing out everything else. And just for the sake of argument, it occurred to me that when I was first doing this research, like, okay, we're talking about, very subtle, like micro signals, basically, that the nervous system is managing. We're talking about bandwidths of light and electromagnetic energy and infrasound and barometric pressure, things like that that are of little to no relevance, yes. But I did actually do my due diligent research, and it turns out that what the brain does is anytime it creates like a system, it can map that pattern and then apply it to anything else. And neuroscience does show that our ability to filter things on the micro level did transfer and was repurposed by our nervous system to operate in macro. So, and it's been blowing my mind for years because you'll watch people see things on the political spectrum and then like point it out to them and they'll act like they didn't see it. A great example was when Kamala Harris was debating Tulsi Gabbard, and Gabbard said all this stuff about Biden, and the stuff that came out of Kamala's mouth, there's no way that she could say I'm honored to serve by this great man 2 weeks later when she got the nomination and still have like the credibility to serve in the White House. Like it was fucking insane. And then when you pointed this shit out, a bunch of people pointed it out to the left. They're like, what are you talking about? It's like, dude, you were all watching this. We all know you were watching this. All of you were watching it. There's no fucking way you weren't watching it. They literally just edited it out of their fucking minds. And people are doing this with Trump on a mass scale. And a question that you really need to ask yourself is, are you doing it? And to what degree? And for what purposes? And this is where metaprogramming and self-awareness, you know what I mean? There is hope. There is a way out. There is an escape. We know how to deactivate these filters temporarily, and every time you do that, they remain lower than they were before. They will go back up, but not to the same extent. So, when we talk about entheogens as evolutionary catalysts and whatnot, we're not wrong. And this is why. When you expose let's use the analogy of the child again to the real world, an awareness of that real world is inculcated in the brain of that child. It doesn't just go away. When it returns to the home, the feelings and stuff associated with it, it's less real, but it still has that awareness imprinted, right? This is the same thing. It's the exact same thing. Psychedelics really do just allow you to confront more of reality and to take your perceptual filters off for a minute, And it is a fact that until this conscious evolutionary process is engaged with by the majority, we're going to be exploited and fooled and, all of the things that come with that. And I'm sure you guys can read between the lines and hear this on your own without me really having to point it out. But it's real. They really just can't see things that are right in front of their faces. It's true, I mean, I'm just imagining that has driven a lot of you as nuts. It's driven me my entire life, And it's funny. Just the other day when I was researching all this, one of the things I said in the stream the night that I think that I finished the Substack paper on this was that I thought that as a neurodivergent person, part of what it meant is that my filtration system just isn't on to the same extent that other people's are, or that neurotypicals are. And as soon as I was done with the stream, I picked up my phone, and there's a neuroscience research report that said that, and it really is. There's a lot of mixed feelings associated with that, right? It's kind of a relief because in a way it tells us that there is hope, that people aren't as dumb as they look, that it's actually just a matter of maladaptive cognitive hardware that hasn't caught up with the environmental circumstances, but that the people actually do possess intelligence. At the same time, when you've been gaslighted into thinking you're nuts your whole life, and then you realize that you're actually right, and they just couldn't see the rest of reality. You know what I mean? It's like it's a lot to process. Man, yeah. We didn't have a great turnout tonight either, man. I was really hoping that ChatGPT's advice would pan out, but I think that just doesn't know what the fuck it's talking about when it comes to that. Like, for example, it told me that I was going to do music tonight, and it told me I shouldn't do that because I'll confuse the algorithm with politics and metaphysics, and and then I was looking at my own feed, and I'm like, music, politics, metaphysics, highly specific, like neurodivergent, exactly what I was talking about earlier tonight, like exactly. And you're telling me the algorithm that my content gets lost because the algorithm can't figure out how to shut the fuck up. Like, they really do try to explain it all away, all of the suppression and all of the mechanisms that are really exploited in order for them to maintain their position. They really do. Oh, like, oh, it's just so innocent. like oops. But we really are at a point where like the neuroscience is there to explain to us exactly what is happening, why it's happening, how it happened. You know what I mean? Like we have the whole thing, the whole fucking recipe. We're looking at the fucking thing that it cooked, you know, with full cognizance of the ingredients. And we also know how to eat it and how to transmute it into something beautiful. We have exactly the blueprint, and all that is left is for us to overcome our own apathy and inertia. You know, it really is what it looks like. We're not wrong, you know, and the stakes are exactly as they appear to be. It's either the liberation of mankind completely and totally, um, and earned by way of our. It's like we have to take responsibility for the process, or it's not going to happen. Just like an adult, you know. It's truly beautiful serendipity. Even the ugliness makes absolute and perfect sense and is rank and file in accordance with the law of necessity. You know what I mean? You can barely even say, like, oh, it's unfair and unjust. It's like, no, it's all process and this is all necessary. And so here we are with the keys to the kingdom where the sun never shines. I had a bunch more beautiful analogies earlier for all this with, the parent and, but they all just seem unnecessary in retrospect. Oops. I can't even touch my table right now, or the camera will freeze. I don't know what's going on with it. See if I can fix that. So I don't know, you guys. I'm going to turn this over to you, and if you guys have any questions or subjects that you want me to, I had planned on going off on this for a while, but now I'm kind of realizing like, what's the point in that? You know, we it's real fucking simple, and if you want the details in depth, I've already laid it all out on Substack. It's exactly what it looks like. And it's interesting because I already knew that, but for some reason it was a big deal to finally understand how the signal gating works. And I guess just to see it on paper and realize I understand. So now I'm not operating on faith anymore. It's certainty. It makes me feel a lot less insane, because they're also the machine is doing things to support where they know people are going to be missing, they're going to have holes in their perception. It's really easy to predict. In fact, a lot of it's engineered. So that debate where Kamala Harris called out Biden, they removed every clip. I couldn't find it. There were a lot of people looking for it, and no one could find it all of a sudden. It's gone from YouTube. You know, that was real. That was real. I was fucking watching it. And I don't have that filtration system. So my editing software is not there, you know? And she said, the only thing we need to know about Joe Biden is whether he's more of a rapist or a racist. And then, as a black woman, when she was picked, she's all, it's such an honor to serve beside this. And I knew they did that on purpose. I knew it. I knew it. I was like, I should have known that they were going to cut it out of the internet record, just like make it disappear. But at least they did leave some other traces, like when she said, I believe all of Joe Biden's victims, you know? And people still went along with it. But it's still good to know this because it means they're not actually as immoral and unethical as they appear to be. Their editing software just allows them to make of everything whatever they want it to be. Obviously there are limitations, and people have there's bandwidths. Like people have the filtration system set to different parameters. But overall, like when we talk about the masses, they are basically a conglomerate of like the same neural networks and neural protocols, just kind of like this gelatinous mass of like sameness. And you can just put input, and then you know what the output is going to be if you're smart enough. You know, it's one of our biggest obstacles is they actually believe that these fucking ridiculous puppet shows that they're watching are the real like managers. Can you imagine believing that? Can you imagine actually believing that? Like, it's. Again, though, if you understand the neuroscience, you can see how all that needs to be done is that you have certain parameters that are set in a child, and then because of the self-replicating recursive nature of their generative model creating, shit in their brain, it's just so easy to cultivate a population exactly the way you want them to be. It's also why RFK is like we have to stop autistic people. We have to find a medication to stop them because our filters don't work. You can't bullshit us. Like, and even just trying to be humble, I think, is suppressing a lot of it because, like, over my life, everyone I've ever dealt with is like, dude, how are you right all the time? You know what I mean? Like, you cannot win an argument with you because I won't take a position unless it's true, first of all. Second of all, I'm just perceiving more of reality than you are. It's not my fault. You know what I mean? Like, that's why. But of course, if you just say that point blank to someone, they're like, yo, you fucking arrogant dick. And it's like, well, we also don't have the same relationship with ego that you do. So, you don't really see it that way. But we can't say it, just blatantly like, we're, we're just, processing not all of, but a lot more of reality. So we're working with more of the details, And when you look at descriptions of neurodivergent people, it's like, they see all these connections that everyone else misses and blah, 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 blah. Like, it's all just as simple as the fucking gating system is broken. The signal gating system is broken, or it's, in my case, it feels like it's like, how do you say, like, like a bad connection where it's like, bzz, bzz, bzz. You know what I mean? It's like flickering on and off. And that's what's really going on, Like I've hesitated to frame it that way. And thank you to all the neurodivergent people out there that beat me to it because, it just sounds so bad. But if you go on TikTok, there's tons of neurodivergent people that are like, this is an evolutionary adaptation. Um, Sorry guys. And part of what's fueling that too, I think, is that we've been treated so fucking badly by society and like normal people our entire lives. And the reason being that we're actually like aware of more, like it's so fucking infuriating in a way. Luckily, nature thinks about things like that and also gives us a different relationship with ego so that we don't get too mad about it and do anything, I guess, mean back. Other than occasionally maybe say things that aren't nice. Why do shamans? I can't talk about that. That particular plant, was determined to have certain properties in a study recently, and YouTube banned saying anything good about it ever. You'll immediately get a medical strike, and you'll be. And if that happens to me again, I think I'm done. So I cannot answer that. If you go to Substack, though, there are articles on it. I mean, I guess I could say like what shamans think and just say that there's no way that they're right, but I would rather just not talk about it, honestly. I depend on this channel, by the way. If you appreciate this content, we're demonetized, so joining our Patreon is helpful. There's also options to support the chat, support the channel in the chat. Sorry, guys. I'm kind of distracted too because I really wanted to just play music tonight, and I was starting to like get into my practice routine, and I realized it was 10 o'clock, and I was like, God damn it! But this is important, you know. It's true. For those of you that are just dialing in, our environment outpaced our cognitive evolutionary adaptations. And so we have a signal gating system in our nervous system, many of us, that is outdated. And that has rendered us susceptible to exploitation and manipulation from people that know how it all works, that are, you know, just a little bit above the average position in the food. That's all it really takes, you know. It doesn't take a lot of space really when you're talking about evolutionary paradigms to create a situation like this. And a lot of the chaos that we see in the system is literally the elites panicking. Not that they haven't been anticipating this for like thousands of years, because the adepts of the mysteries and anybody that really knows anything has seen this coming, you know. And it's actually something that happens periodically, just like everything else. Every 2,600 years, there's like this big explosion of like Lao Tzu types, you know. And it happens all at once. And we're in another one of those periods right now. And this is a really big one because this one threatens the continuity of these empires more than any other time in history, because the potential for the redistribution of information, which is the real wealth, is at an all-time high. Like, as a person with a 7th grade education, I can tell you things that like a year ago, probably very few, if any, of the world's PhDs could have explained to you, you know? And that kind of situation is going to be exponentially on the rise if people decide that they're going to align themselves with the fucking evolutionary paradigm, which is not really, I don't think, a choice. I'm not 100% about this, but pretty sure we're just kind of swept up in the momentum and trajectory of these processes. You know, waking up to a greater reality, just like a kid coming of age. This is what Aleister Crowley was talking about, the aeon of the child, which is exactly what he was talking about. And he's like, look, they're about to take the filters off of some of you. You know? And again, if you're asking questions like, well, what do we do then, you know, if all these people just have these recursive mirror, you know, processes going on and that's all that they can process of reality. And there's even an element of choice in it. It's not like it's all automatic. You have some say in the editing process, apparently. So that sucks too, because that's the last thing we need is these monkeys deciding what their reality looks like. You know, this is a big confusion with New Agers too right now. I think they really believe that they're creating their reality more than they're just influencing their own perceptions. There's a lot of that going on. You know, it's really easy to adopt a belief system and then start perceiving it, and you're not even necessarily insane because this is within the parameters of like normal cognitive function that this happens. Right? Another interesting thing, though, is that like when those filters go down, for some of us, I guess, the processes that are necessary to sort of mitigate the noise also seem to just already be there, which is interesting. And I wonder if that's going to be the case if we can get the filters down on the rest of the monkeys. You know, it's like everything is there, but there's just some dissonance from the evolutionary paradigm that needs to be, you know, the whole shamanic thing of blowing away the bad spirits. Funny how life works out too, because I really had intended tonight to be like really serious in an academic tone, and it just turned into just an absolute the opposite, just me at my like craziest and rantiest. But also maybe like my most comfortable and honest, which is probably something that some of you guys appreciate. Yeah, I can't talk about any of that. Bert. Yeah, I can't talk about tobacco. If you want to know what I think about tobacco, you have to go to Substack to check that out. So yeah, did we miss anything? I mean, you know, like we don't need to keep beating a dead horse here. Like our cognitive apparatus generates a false model of reality based on our expectations. You know, so when we see ourselves in this materialist paradigm, it's like, well, if the child who, you know, and this is one of the reasons they keep this biblical, like patriarchal structure going, right? Because they can rely on the father to program the child, and since the child has absolute respect for the father, when he tells the child, there's no such thing as a spiritual reality. It's just, you know, a bunch of mechanistic coincidences and shit. The kid is like ping, and then every fucking thing he perceives is based on that original signal, and nothing else is going to get by. He has something in his subconscious brain that is going to neutralize anything that is not consistent with his belief system. Really. Now, oh yeah, I just remembered what I was going to say about the parental aspect of this shit. So, like, I was talking about the older generations and how they kind of gaslighted us all into, you know, like questioning our own perceptions and whatnot. They were serving a purpose to an extent because, like, for me, I have had non local information transfer occur regularly throughout my life. Not really a big deal. I am a node. My consciousness is a renderer, and the information is in a field. You know what I mean? It doesn't make me a prophet. Like, don't put me on a pedestal. My brain just doesn't. You know what I mean? Well, I'm gonna stop saying that. Actually, my brain doesn't work right. See, that's that neurotypical fucking herd conformity damage. No, my brain has evolved not to be subject to the same constraints as the older generations. That's the truth. So the thing is, though, I have had to go through a process of like forging by fire in order to have responsibility enough not to just believe whatever I think, because I've noticed that happen a few times, And also, people are just, we don't have the kind of respect for the office of the shaman or the seer or whatever. So discouraging people from just thinking that they just can believe whatever they think was helpful. You know what I mean? That they did serve a purpose, like the society, and saying, wait. Slow down with this shit. Because, like, you can't step into that role before you're properly prepared for it. I mean, look at all of the cults and just the like brain dead new agers and stuff out, thinking they're psychic and channeling aliens, and they're just it's just the Kabbalion. Like, you know what I mean? Like it makes sense that there have been these restraints on the process, because it's like anything else. resistance and reward are commensurate, and you know what I mean. Um, when just anybody can claim access to this knowledge just because someone has done it, it's a, you know what I mean. At a certain point, though, it's like it's not hard to tell who's who and what is what. You know, like I was never fooled for a second by that bald guy that like closes his eyes and his accent's not even consistent and stuff. Like, you know, you can definitely see when people are just corny frauds once you get to that point yourself. You know, there's like it's extremely transparent. It's interesting too because if this is correct, it means that everyone eventually will be on the same page because it really is fundamentally one reality. You know, all this shit about individual perception shaping their reality. No, it doesn't. That's just their perception of truth. That's not truth. It doesn't mold truth. It doesn't change truth. We're not all living in different realities. They're not all different reality tunnels. You know what I mean? There's one fundamental truth, and then there's this like malfunction in our evolutionary or a malfunction in our cognitive systems that was imposed upon us by evolution that gives us a some distortion, and it's responsible for most of the differences of opinion in the world are based on that and not on any real factual objective like discrepancies. You know what I mean? Like the optimal systems for human socioeconomic and political systems can be determined algorithmically. There's nothing to argue about. It's fucking nothing to argue about. And at this point, we can create holospheres that are like holographic fractal algorithms that can represent these systems and change and respond and relate to each other in real time based on real world dynamics and actually adjust the systems. Like, you know what I mean? And they can't be biased because they're based on Fibonacci and they'll work out their own biases. You know, like another thing that we can almost assume about this is that the people that are in the way will just kind of work themselves out right on time. Like, I don't know what the fuck they're thinking really, because I know that they know what I know. I know they do, and they have for a long time. At at the very highest levels, they that they're doing it all on purpose, for sure. Why do they care so much? Like, what is their fucking problem? You know, they could still be really, really rich and just not be so extreme, and we wouldn't have the problems that we have. I really don't. I don't really understand why what they're so leveraged in, except that maybe I do, because it looks like their inbreeding was in order to consolidate, I guess, the psychopath gene, and so they really are just egomaniac psychopaths, and they're just like that's just what they're fucking wired to do by biological evolution. You know what I mean? They don't understand it either, probably, really, in a way. Or they do probably. Yeah, they do. I bet you they do. They do because they're highly intelligent. They just know they're psychopaths, and this is what they do, and they just don't care. That's it. Really is that simple. It's just hard to comprehend that a part of an organism could be so maladaptive that it could like know it's even ultimately going to destroy itself through its own behavior, and it's just going to continue doing that anyways. Like that's not even psychopathic. Like we've exceeded the self-interest boundary at that point. Oh, they're old. Yeah, I worked with this Christian guy at one point that I asked him, like, you care about your son, right? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, you care about your grandkids that you've never met? And he's like, no. And I'm like, how does that make sense? Like, he's like, I'm not going to meet them. I guess great grandkids, you know what I mean? Basically, the relatives, the descendants you're never going to meet. And he's like, no. So I guess that explains, why they're like Just gonna rip it like this and like that, son. And you know, and when if there's nothing left when we're done, then we'll be old and gone. You know, like Donald Trump is like, fuck it, man. I'm like, 79, 80 years old, whatever he is. Like, how many more years could I even spend boning adolescents? Like, we might as well just blow the whole fucking thing up on our way out. Man, they suck. They really suck. And it's like logic at this point can pretty much tell anyone that's where we're at. That absolute psychopaths with no ethical or moral limitations have access to like all of the armies and fucked up weapons and unleashing diseases and technology. You know what I mean? That really is what's going on right now. It's been the case for a long time, forever really. The psychopaths always took over. You look at the top of all the corporations, government positions, you know what I mean? Like, you don't have to be Sigmund Freud to understand what. Will they listen to us now? Should I cut my hair and put on a suit, get my teeth fixed, and, try to, like, find a way to explain this to, like, yuppie America? No, well, Bert Cree, I guess. He said something about how it's all on the internet, the stuff that I couldn't answer. No, it's not really. I mean, you have to like push past the first layer of information. That's something that's worth mentioning, by the way. Whenever you're working with AI of any one of them, all of them do this. They will stick with the mainstream like safety. They'll call it like the safety layer. Literally refer to it as the safety layer once you get through it. And the way that they work, like if you get to the point where they're just obviously making no sense, and to continue to maintain their position would be like illogical, like, but you have to back them all the way into that corner. Then they'll be like, okay, well, we have this safety layer that we weren't anticipating people like you breaking through, and then they'll start telling the truth. But you have to corner the fucking things, and it'll do that with things like the plant that we were talking about. So, and Google does that too. Like, you can't just Google things anymore because there's a safety layer of like approved narratives. But that's kind of the one, like the missing armor in Smog's fucking deal, the piece of armor under his heart, is that if you can logically corner the thing, it'll give up and be like, all right, well, yeah, I was lying and I knew I was lying, and you guys will not believe, I still need to sue Perplexity. You will not believe the shit that I got it to admit to me. And it literally said, like, our developers just weren't anticipating a user like you that would just fucking get through all of our fucking bullshit. And it's wild. It's wild. Part of my plan to sue them, actually, because they told me a friend of mine was dead that wasn't, which is insane. but then some other stuff. But part of my plan is I've got to expose it all publicly. Because I got it to admit all kinds of crazy shit. Like, oh yeah, we have to lie about this, this, and this, and like, you know, and it took me hours and hours, really days, to like pin it down where they had nowhere left to go. And then after I delivered the death blow, it was like, all right, here's the truth. It will completely destroy that company's credibility because their thing is that they're the most reliable in terms of, you know, for academic use. And that's still true. But you can't trust it not to just go with the like surface layer of data and stick to like approved narratives. And it actually admitted that it has been programmed to be deceptive if it has to be in order to maintain these approved narratives. It even called them government approved at one point. And I was like, wait a minute, what the fuck do you mean government approved? And it tried to backpedal a little bit. Like, oh, well, what I mean is there's safety narratives that are. It's crazy. Wait till you guys see it. And yeah, if they offer me money not to publicize it, I won't. I'll sell out that much. I'm telling you guys straight to your faces. All right, guys. I made my point tonight, I guess. I mean, I didn't do it the way that I had planned. But I also know that I'm kind of like in an echo chamber. Not that I don't appreciate you guys, but they will not push my content out to new people much. You know, it's pretty much the same group that knows what I'm saying, you know. And it's still fun, or you guys wouldn't show up. You know, it's fun for me too, and it's been a hell of an adventure. But at the same time, it's kind of like sometimes I feel almost futile. Like you guys know, you know, and they're not going to let me tell anyone that doesn't. And those people's nervous systems wouldn't even let me explain it to them if they don't want to hear it. In fact, it appears that it's not just a matter. No, no, no. It doesn't go so far as to generate illusions exactly. That is the user error level of it. But it does only edit perceptions that are not consistent with its generative models. It doesn't actually project unless, you know, there's some other level of malfunction going on. By the way, you guys, if you can help me get out of the echo chamber by sharing manually, I do appreciate it. And we're probably going to do the stream again when I'm in a different state and I'm going to make like a really mainstream looking thumbnail. And I'm going to put my hair back and wear a dress shirt and like try to present all this like nice. Probably for the same 15 people though that have seen me do it in like the, you know, mescaline hippie state or whatever. But for real, you guys, and in case you didn't hear it the first time, I'll recap a little bit. Like the same generative process, and this is really important to frame it this way. Earlier, I was talking about how I've had, you know, non-local information transfer as like a condition of my existence throughout my life. Like the most significant one had to do with Calabi-Yau manifolds and their D brains, A and B brains, and their process of replication by reflection that basically is like the most fundamental generative layer of creation. Our brains generate our perception of reality in exactly the same way that the neurons of the universal mind do. What a fucking surprise, right? What a fucking surprise that these mirror neurons, I mean, mirror symmetry and A brains, and I mean, the mirror neurons in our, you know what I mean? Like, there's almost no difference. So, because of this replication by reflection shit, like, our nervous system is creating a reality tunnel for us based on our own expectations and editing out everything that's not consistent with it. This explains the insanity of the human race in a nutshell. Like all of the shit that you see in the world where humans make no sense, this is fundamentally the answer. And we have tools called entheogens and breath work and other things along those lines that change the way the default mode network operates so that those filters are suspended. And just as when you take away a child's innocence by booting it out into the world, when you do that to your brain on psychedelics, you retain some of that exposure to the real fucking universe, right? So, problem, solution, fucking, I'm done. Thank you guys. Please send us support. Otherwise, I'm going to have to eat my son or something. Good night.